Welcome to the Process Industry Informer podcast, where process professionals can learn and share ideas and information.
Welcome to this latest podcast from Process Industry Informer. Today we have two speakers from AspenTech. The first is Lawrence Clark, VP, Regional Sales, EUA, and also Richard Porter, Senior Manager Area Sales for EUA. Hello both.
Hi.
Hello there.
Well, first of all, I think it would be probably a good idea for our listeners to get a kind of idea of what AspenTech's about and what you guys are sort of helping your customers to achieve. So could you give us a kind of brief overview of, I guess, what AspenTech has sort of been doing recently and what kind of challenges are you helping your sort of customers meet?
Yeah, I'll cover that then if that's okay. So, yeah, where we are, our overall proposition is to accelerate the digital transformation of the industry we serve by optimizing their assets to run safer, greener, longer and faster. That's the overall sort of message. Specifically in terms of our predictive analytics solution, that's actually helping pharmaceutical manufacturers ensure security of supply, guaranteeing that customers have drugs available to them when they are needed, and also bringing tangible operational efficiencies and helping them avoid too much time spent on data science experiments that don't bring a business benefit.
Super. I think, first of all, it would be useful to get, a sort of potted bio, if you like, of you guys. So, Lawrence, if you could give us an overview of what you've been doing recently and how you maybe came to AspenTech and what your key roles are in the business.
Absolutely, yeah. So my role is I'm the Vice President at AspenTech responsible for our pharmaceutical customers. In terms of territory, that covers Europe and Africa. Previous to that, I was a Vice President of Technology at Oracle, where I was there for 12 years. And prior to that, I was actually from an information technology background. So I was actually an IT manager for a company called Christian Salverson, actually implementing supply chain solutions as well. So from a technical background, although I joined AspenTech just over a year ago, particularly on the basis of the very strong value proposition we had for the pharmaceutical customers.
Super. So, Richard, if you could also give us a sort of potted history of what you've been up to.
Hi there. Hi Dave. I'm Richard Porter. I'm responsible for a team at AspenTech looking after some of our key pharmaceutical and chemical accounts in Europe. I've been working in the industry now for around 30 years, implementing, supporting, selling, manufacturing data, execution, analytical tools into the pharmaceutical and chemical manufacturers. Strangely, I started my career at AspenTech and that's where I am now, but went off and wanderlust years in between. So I started in the early 90s before working with customers like GSK, moving into other major manufacturing automation vendors, the likes of Siemens and GE. I returned back to AspenTech 6 years ago, but throughout that time, I've never been able to escape sort of the magnetic lure of pharmaceuticals. Wherever I go, I found myself working for the likes of GSK, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer. And in those companies, I've been implementing the manufacturing IT solutions, data historians, manufacturing execution, analytical tools, the systems that bring great value to those individual companies. What's interesting for me is that in the past, that's been something that's been very much a technical push, but it's very refreshing to see that digitization and these digital tools are now very high on the executive agenda at these companies. And it's a trend we've been seeing for the last few years.
Super. Okay, guys. Well, thanks for that overview. I guess to kick us off, we kind of want to set the scene a bit, don't we? We kind of want to talk about, the industry as an overview. So, Richard, if I asked you the question, what the key trends are which are impacting pharmaceutical manufacturing today, how would you respond to that?
So some of these trends have been around for years, and some of them are relatively new. Historically and currently, pharmaceutical manufacturers need to ensure their security of supply. A customer will require a drug at that moment in time. If the drug isn't available, they will go to a different product. They don't suffer. So it's imperative for them to maintain that security of supply. And in order to ensure that, traditionally, pharmaceutical customers have invested in excess capacity to avoid any risk that there would be low asset utilization, there'll be failures that would put a risk to having product on the shelf. So asset failure isn't an option. Pharmaceutical manufacturers are challenged by the need to comply with regulations around the quality of manufacturing and traceability. This results in an inflexibility in their manufacturing. They can't rapidly change. So that results in them being risk adverse and wary of new methods. They can't bring things in quite easily. So they continue to work in these silos. But what's changed in recent years, the cost of manufacture has increased, the regulations have increased. At the same time, there are price pressures as products come off patent, as the generic products come through. There is, and just general market pressure to reduce the cost of drugs means that there's a lot more squeeze on these companies. They have to reduce the cost of manufacture, and the option of having excess assets is not really a valid way going forward.
So do you see, I guess, a tangible shift in the marketplace when you speak to your customer base? Does that come up consistently? That, yes, we understand our legacy, the way we've always done things, but they do realise that they must move forward. They must make some changes, and those changes really must be done very quickly if they are to, I guess, be able to innovate in the future at speed, which clearly is a driving factor for them. Are those the conversations you're having consistently?
Yeah, the option of having excess capacity, of not caring so much about the manufacturing cost, just isn't there anymore. They know that, so they try and get more and more out of their assets, and any interruption to that production then will result in potentially not having product on the shelf.
Sure.
And they lose out to their competition. They are negatively impacted on customer loyalty, and in some cases, in certain drugs, they are patented, they're the only supply. They put people's lives at risk, and that's a key driver for these companies, for the big pharmaceutical companies. They are all about looking after people. So you've got to have the drug on the shelf. So what that means is that you're trying to still ensure that security of supply while using less equipment, and so it's got to be more reliable. And that's where AspenTech have come into this. We are providing solutions to ensure that reliability, to be able to predict when things are going wrong, that why your production is drifting or an asset is going to fail. So in the past, where customers have typically invested in excess capacity or excess maintenance, they've got to try and avoid that, and then just intuitively know that the production is more reliable. And the final thing really is that drugs are expensive. If an asset fails and you've got an asset full of a drug substance, typically drugs are worth thousands, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of dollars a batch. If an asset fails, it's typically contaminated. There's a problem with it and it has to go in the bin. It's very rare that you can recycle it, and that's just a huge loss. So you've got all these different reasons why a failure of an asset is extremely costly in terms of security of supply, in terms of cost.
I think that's a key component within their production process, isn't it? Is to manage their assets as efficiently as possible. We often talk about how to manage that, how to monitor that, either on site or remotely. But it's also a tangible thing, isn't it? It's, as you say, if a batch fails, it fails, and that's obviously something you really want to avoid that if possible. And when you talk about sort of asset failure, do you often find that those take place in sort of common areas? And those common areas are where sort of AspenTech focus its help. Is there a common asset failure that you sort of hear about all the time, for instance, that you guys are helping your customers to either avoid or at least to manage or to mitigate?
I think that's a question I'd take. So, is there a common asset? There are certain assets that are common. You find things that rotating machinery like pumps, or machinery like spray dryers, freeze dryers, that are common in most of pharmaceutical manufacturers. There are also very unique ones, but the common ones, you can often find that, for example, there might be a seal on a mixer.
Yeah,
that
sure.
seal replicates itself across numerous assets that the company has, sometimes within one site, sometimes across multiple sites. If we can find a solution for predicting failures on that seal, we can then take that and apply that to others. And that can have a huge impact in terms of overall reliability. You learn something at one location and then you spread it out to others. And the technologies we're talking about, these digital technologies, they can, you learn it on one asset, you spread it out, and then they improve. By learning more and more and more from all the different assets, we get better and better at predicting. On the other hand, sometimes there is a use case for a unique piece of equipment that is unique to that particular drug, but it's a critical drug. It's one that the marketplace needs, that if that drug fails, if that production fails, then there is no drug on the shelf. And those situations, there's a huge business case, just a one-off learning on that particular asset.
Super. Thanks for that detailed overview, Richard. I think it's a really good sort of scene setter, I guess, for the more detailed stuff that we're going to be coming to in a minute. I'd like to you next, Lawrence. One of the important things I think to sort of talk about initially, we are going to talk about sort of digitization and how that's impacting on pharmaceutical manufacture. But I'd like to ask initially, really, why haven't we seen more of that? Why haven't we seen more of maybe a shift to more digital tools and maintenance and monitoring and analytics? Why do you think it's been a little bit slow in that market sector?
That's a really good question, David. And I wouldn't say the pharmaceutical industry is a laggard in comparison to other industries, but
Sure.
But by necessity, they've already got well-established, complex validation processes in place to be able to produce the drugs anyway. So they've already got those systems in place, albeit they may be relatively manual at the moment and maybe aren't digital. But if the technology or the manual processes are working already in that environment, then customers tend to be reluctant to take on additional evaluation pain in a bid to achieve even more time to value. So there is that initial, concern over, we do it already, okay, it may not be perfect, but it is delivering the validation that we require to actually produce the drugs as well. On the positive side, digital products like we produce don't directly impact the drug. All they're doing is giving advice that ultimately an individual will act upon under and after normal controls as well. So the systems can be easily implemented with relatively little validation demands. And I think that's maybe an issue maybe that the pharmaceutical customers don't appreciate. The implementation of our systems don't require an overhead in terms of validation, but do require a mechanism to provide advice that people can or can't act upon.
So the view is almost, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It works. Let's just leave it alone. Thank you. Let's just not muck around with that because we need a system which we know works. Historically, it works for us.
Exactly.
But I don't want to call them sort of short-sighted because they're not. Because clearly they innovate every day. But their kind of use of digital technologies, and that's quite a broad heading, which I think we'll sort of get into more detail later on. I think clearly they can see that. They understand that these tools are available. But do you find it's nudging them in the right direction to show them that, guess, we can do this for you, and it isn't going to be a massive impact on your production. We can do this, and you will see tangible benefits very quickly, but without all of the perceived disruption, I guess.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And there is that perception, I think, David, in the marketplace that this is a complex solution that requires, an army of data scientists and programmers and everything else as well. Well, actually, it isn't at all. In fact, our solutions are more often used by the existing production operation managers, or our classes like normal workers, rather than having to employ an army of data scientists. So our expectation is the existing staff within our customers can utilize our software. The training is very comprehensive, and it's a very logical, qualified process, so they can use it as well. So we don't really need an army of data scientists. It's allowing engineers to have more information to allow them to make more informed decisions earlier on.
That's an important point to sort of get over, isn't it? That the kinds of systems and help that AspenTech have been developing, it understands that you remove the complexity, particularly from, let's call it, the kind of the customer-facing end, if you like, the actual interface itself. Yeah,
absolutely.
You guys have done all the hard work. The system actually works, but when Mr. Production Manager uses the system, it's very intuitive. The whole idea is to remove the complexity from him or her, to deliver a solution that meets all of the criteria, to digitize whatever the process is, for instance, but not to make that complex. It's not about complexities. It's about simplifying how you look at that data, how that data is presented, the tangible benefits that information can give the user.
Absolutely, and it's a case of utilizing the existing users as well. As I said, we're not, we're enabling the engineers with the tools to allow them to make more effective and timely decisions. We're not looking to employ any more additional people. These are existing people who can be very quickly trained, become qualified in utilizing the tools that we provide.
Absolutely. What we're trying to do with AspenTech, we hide away the complex data algorithms behind. You don't need to be a data scientist. You don't need to have that hands-on knowledge of the mathematics. What we try and do is we take the data that's coming in and we give the advice We advise the operator, the managers, as what they should be doing and allow them to act upon that, but take away all the complex data science.
Okay, guys, I think that's very clear. I think listeners are kind of putting the picture. They understand the framework for what you guys are about. Actually, I'd like to stay with you, Richard, if I could. I guess we kind of need to speak about what kind of digital technology we're actually speaking about. Now, in this context, often artificial intelligence is used as an umbrella term, but actually what we're really talking about is machine learning, isn't it? And I really wanted to ask you to sort of give us a sort of brief overview of really how machine learning in particular really connects with the pharmaceutical space. Can you kind of give us a brief idea of how those two link together?
Well, one of the beauties of pharmaceutical manufacture, particularly over the last decade or so, is that there's a lot of data available. And fundamentally, when it comes to machine learning and searching through that data to find out how machines have behaved, that is the basic foundation you need. So pharmaceutical typically has a lot of data. So we can look back over the history. If we know that a process has regularly gone amiss, that we've got bad yields, or that an asset has failed on a regular basis, we can look back over the data and say, take a look at that. We know at that point in time, in the past, this has occurred. Can you find any patterns in the data? Can you find what has led to this, such that when we come to seeing that pattern again in the future, we can predict? What's more, we'll learn what we did to correct it. So potentially we can say that if you pull this temperature back a bit, if you slow that machine a tiny bit, if you add in this particular material, you will add a little bit more water, you will avoid the event that occurred in the past. Ideally, you can avoid it completely. You can actually give that advice that it never occurs, the bad thing never happens. But worst case, you give it's such an advanced warning that you can plan better for it, that you've got a shutdown coming down the line in 2 weeks' time, and I will plan to make a change at that moment in time.
Okay, Richard. Yes, I think that's a very important point, isn't it? That pharmaceutical industry in particular, we talk about big data, don't we? We talk about these huge data sets and the tsunami of information that can be pouring into businesses. You'd have to say pharmaceuticals must be up there as one of the huge data sets which they must be generating on an hourly basis. I think the important thing is data without analysis is useless, isn't it? Data in silos that isn't connected together is useless. So it's really about understanding the information that you've got, isn't it? And extracting some useful and tangible information from that, or at least something you can actually act upon. Although I'd also like to initially ask you with machine learning, particularly in pharmaceuticals, have you found that, oddly enough, when this data is analysed with your systems, I guess information kind of emerges. It kind of reveals itself. And that's the kind of stuff which an actual business itself can actually act upon.
Yeah, I mean, we are basically trying to extract knowledge and insight out of the data. The data there's huge amounts of it. It's the lake, it's the thing, it's the big data.
Yeah.
You can't just look at it. Traditionally, you might bring up a univariate trend, and we'll try and look at one value, but there's so much of it, you can't see the patterns. So you need the tools. This is where the whole sort of data science comes from. You've got to have some way of looking at this wealth of data, the Internet of Things. It's a cliche term nowadays, but yeah, the Internet of Things here means we've got to somehow process it, and that's what the tools that we're providing. It's a way of looking at the data, processing the data, cleaning the data, learning the patterns in the data, learning how to respond to patterns that we see, and giving that prescriptive response to this is happening and this is what you should do to avoid it, or make it happen again. I mean, you can be looking for trends that are positive as well. That's
absolutely.
People often failure. Often people feel that you're looking for the bad thing, and that's why sometimes you're looking for the good thing. So we keep doing that.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, often from a, let's say, process manager's point of view, he or she is looking for failure, aren't they? They're monitoring whatever they're monitoring, but they would like to be looking for optimization and all the rest of it, but they are looking for failure, aren't they? They're looking for some way of keeping their process or the manufacturing moving forward. So they are using systems like that to look for failure. But I think it's absolutely right that that's not the whole part of the equation, is it? When you look at what you can do with data and what you can do with machine learning in particular, that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of the positives, isn't it? That's how you can actually start to improve your business, improve your process. But you can only do that if you have systems to interrogate that information correctly and then present that to a user in a way that they can actually understand that. I mean, what I was going to ask you on the end of that question was, when you're speaking to your sort of your customers, is there a kind of fear that we have all this data, but how on earth are we going to make any sense of that? And that's where AspenTech comes in. So we understand your challenge, and here's a solution.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a fear because of the validation. The processes, as Lawrence said earlier, processes are validated. They are kind of set in stone. That's the nature of pharmaceuticals. It has been for many years. So there is a fear that these are technologies that will give an advice, but can we trust it?
Yes.
Can we make that move?
Yes, indeed.
And if we do take that advice, are we going to break our validation status? Are we going to break some rules? So one of the things that, from our point of view, is that we ensure that we're pulling data from good data. The data itself has to be validated, the historians, and typically they are in a manufacturing environment. But there's always a human being. The system gives advice, and the human has to look at that data, look at the advice, look at the data behind it, and go, yes, this is good. And if any change is made, they use a change control. So they shouldn't be scared of it, basically. There's always the control in place, there's always the protections, and those protections have been in there for years. That any sort of change to the manufacturing process is given a risk assessment. And in pharmaceuticals, unfortunately, that does create a small delay. In some other industries, you can make that change automatically. But it's not something to be scared of, to your point. It's not something to be scared of. It's something we're doing. It's not AspenTech saying you can do this. It's proven now. People are doing it. They are taking the data, taking the advice, looking at it, and acting as appropriate. And the other thing, going back to that positive side of things, you talked about sort of failures. The other thing you look at is that batch of product, we got particularly good quality. That batch of product, we got particularly good yield. Why?
Yeah.
Why did we get that good yield? Why did we get that good quality? So certainly there's then learning to say, these are the characteristics, learning the characteristics of a batch that are good, and then advising that you should do this activity, you should do this, and you'll get better. And you gradually evolve to getting better and better yield, better and better quality, lesser and lesser failures.
Certainly, yes. That's absolutely right. I think what I'd like to sort of look back to is, I think, a comment you made earlier. I think it's an interesting aspect of machine learning when you're trying to do predictive analytics. What's going to happen in the future, or at least what could we predict with a level of accuracy may happen in the future. Now that's a very different ballgame, isn't it? Particularly for manufacturers. If they can do that, that's a game changer, isn't it? I wondered if you could give us an idea of how you guys are approaching the whole sort of predictive analytics space and what that means for AspenTech.
So the predictions we're looking at in terms of, let's take on maintenance, we'll often see a prediction that's 40, 50 days ahead. So it can be hours. I mean, it's not always the case, but usually we get days of advance warning that something's going amiss. Depends on the length of the batch as well. But whatever, you've got an advance warning that you didn't have in the past. That allows you to do something. Be that adjust the process or look forward in time, say, I've got a downtime planned here. We've got a natural cleaning process. We've got a point in time where we plan to take this particular granulator off for service work. We can take that prediction and plan it for the forward. So when we've got a moment in time, we can do the action. It could be that you've got to overhaul a particular motor. You've got to replace this piece of equipment. There's so many different things that can be done. Clean a filter, things that you hadn't planned. The other thing that's nice is avoiding doing stuff that you shouldn't do.
Yes, indeed.
When it comes to maintenance, there's statistics that suggest that a very large proportion of failures are caused by maintenance. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So you've got a piece of equipment that's running along fine, and it's going to keep running fine. But you go in there with a spanner and you change something, and you actually, in actual fact, you create a situation where it's going to fail in the future. And so by looking at these predictive, prescriptive solutions, you can avoid doing stuff you shouldn't do. You can run for longer with lesser maintenance and stop over maintaining. It's a strange thing, but maintenance can actually cause more problems than it solves.
Okay, Richard, thanks for that insight. I'd like to turn back to you, Laura, if I may. I think this conversation, and I guess everything we're going to be talking about today, has to be looked through a sort of lens of COVID, doesn't it? What this current situation is impacting on really every business, every sector. I wonder if you could give us sort of your take on that, and if you felt that the current situation is kind of impacting on, I guess, your customers and how AspenTech can actually deliver its services, and indeed, if you felt it was a positive and actually not a negative.
Yeah, that's a really salient point, actually, David. And interestingly enough, only last week I received an email from a customer saying actually COVID-19 had been the catalyst to accelerating their digital journey, specifically because they've had to implement new systems to provide them with the control around supply chain and everything else as well. And also, I think as products that related to coronavirus in terms of vaccines and everything else come to market, the supply chain pressure will be immense in terms of the volume of product that's got to be produced and distributed worldwide as well. Also, I think once the initial disruption is over and more workplaces are opening, we feel that because of the situation and because of the velocity that was implemented due to COVID-19, the post-COVID world will be much more receptive to digital initiatives as well. And also, I think in terms of, you've probably heard on the news this morning regarding the second wave of COVID-19, this means that there's even more expectation in terms of plants that need to keep running and need to have absolute minimum downtime to ensure that they can continue to provide in terms of production.
Also, I think it's kind of a valid point to make that the whole COVID issue, I guess, obviously for pharmaceuticals for obvious reasons, it's an accelerant, isn't it? It's not an excuse. It's certainly not that. It's not an excuse to do something. But I don't think it's pushing them into directions that they maybe had on their roadmaps, and it's just accelerated that. I don't think that's the case at all, because I think they had that in place anyway, and they were moving that direction, albeit maybe slower than they'd like, but they are moving into the direction of more digitalisation, absolutely. But it's just an acceleration of that, isn't it? They understand that their roadmaps have to be much, much shorter than they were maybe 3 months ago, literally. And more after all, we're doing drug testing, which would take, a decade in 3 months or something, or a year, which is crazy. But you need the systems in place to do that.
And another observation is, of course, pharmaceuticals, they are the engines here that are going to find us a solution, for want of a better term, to COVID. They are finding the treatments or the vaccines that will help us address the problem. But what happens is the R&D is happening now. We're trying to come up with a solution with the drugs or the products that will do it. But when they do get to the point of finding something, they've got to put it into production. And again, from an AspenTech point of view, we provide the tools that allow you to have that security of supply. Got to make sure that there's going to be just so much pressure to get as much drug out in the market as fast as you can. And you've got to have that security supply. You've got to have a reliable process. So that data and data learning is part of the solution for us.
I think that's absolutely correct. In fact, I'd like to turn back to you, Lawrence, and ask you just that. If you could give us a sort of broad overview and put AspenTech sort of in the context of that, what you guys are actually helping customers to achieve.
Yeah, no, thank you, David. Yeah, I mean, in terms of our technologies, which are well proven and implemented in hundreds of companies worldwide, they are specifically developed and unique to the needs of the pharmaceutical companies. To give you some highlights in terms of collaboration, so our solutions provide collaboration all the way from lab to pilot to manufacturing. We can also simulate end-to-end batch processes with first principle models, so we can accelerate regulatory approval and scale up to full production, which is really important at the moment in terms of COVID-19, and also identify factors that impact product quality and process efficiency using multivariate analytics. You can also leverage an approach known as what we call asset performance management, or APM. You may have heard of that, to predict when an asset is likely to fail and what the likely cause of the asset failure is. This enables manufacturers ultimately to take remedial action to prevent that failure, saving them time and money and protecting, very importantly at the moment, their continuity of supply. We can also provide a full MES electronic batch record system that can control and guide the operational procedures, ensuring our customers with pharmaceutical regulations such as FDA's famous 21, CFR Part 11, etc., and drive huge efficiencies in terms of manufacturing and batch release process.
That's super, Lawrence. Thanks for that detail. And I'd also like to just turn back to Rishi for a second. I've been reading a lot about sort of asset performance management, APM, how that sort of impacts on how that, I think, forms a core of what pharmaceutical manufacturers are trying to achieve with their process. Could you give us a kind of an idea about sort of how AMP actually works and how it fits into the process?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not just pharmaceuticals, really. The whole subject of asset performance management is manufacturing wide, but obviously we're talking specifically about pharmaceuticals here. APM, for some companies, non-pharmaceutical, it's all about efficiencies. It's all about driving costs out. For others, particularly pharmaceutical, it's around security of supply. That's the biggest driver. So the APM solutions enable the manufacturers to protect their supply chain, to make sure it keeps running, increase the asset utilization. Means that if your assets are utilized better, you get more out of them. Potentially, you can avoid buying. So instead of having 4 production lines, you can have 3, and you don't have to invest the multi-millions that are required to build a secondary production line or packaging line or whatever asset it is. So you increase your asset utilization, you avoid the downtimes, and you can predict when anomalies are occurring, such that in one hand the asset performance in terms of breakdowns, but also in terms of improving yields, that your yield is going down, your quality is wrong, and bringing everything such that you get as much capacity out of your asset as possible. And really, given today's marketplace, it's a volatile marketplace. We talk about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, and so it was already uncertain. There was already a volatile marketplace, and then you throw in COVID, and it's going even crazier. It's just the right time for pharmaceutical manufacturers to act, to make use of the data they've got. And what's more, it's not just us pushing the idea. I think I mentioned this in my introduction. Digitization and technologies like APM are high on the executives' agenda. Most of these companies, but if we look back 10 years, there wasn't a chief digital officer.
Yes,
the CIO,
yes, indeed.
The CIO typically sat somewhere under the CFO. Now we have the chief digital officer, the chief digital technology officer sat on the board. It's just the right time for these technologies to be on the forefront. There's a real appetite and a recognition that digital technologies will drive benefit and drive value into pharmaceutical manufacturers.
I think that's absolutely right, and that's clearly how the future is going to unfold. It's an interesting point you made earlier in that comment. You were talking about, I guess, rationalisation of pharmaceutical manufacturing in general, I guess. I mean, do you feel, and in fact, this question could also be for Lawrence, if you'd like to comment. Do you feel that the sector as a whole is becoming leaner? It's looking at capacity, it's looking at process, and then it's looking at how digitisation can help with that. And it's just becoming leaner. It's becoming more efficient because of those tools and because they're available.
Yeah, it is becoming leaner, absolutely. But also we're seeing a lot of merger and acquisition activity as well, David.
Indeed, yeah.
In terms of customer and in terms of offshoring as well, in terms of some of the manufacturing process as well. So I think they're aware of it. To Richard's point, the fact that the CDO, the Chief Digital Officer, is now on the main board gives an indication of the importance of this, and particularly now where some of the production environments are such that they need more efficiencies, obviously with the current situation, and this becomes even more important.
Well, actually, merging and acquisitions, that's an interesting point. So I was thinking about that if we jumped on the call for this podcast. It seemed to me that the kind of tools that AspenTech are developing and they're in the marketplace are ideal, because if you are in a sort of M&A situation and you have a tool, you want that to be applicable right across your business, particularly if you're absorbing maybe a smaller, more specialised business. The whole, I guess, value proposition is that if you have a tool from AspenTech, you can still use that because it's looking at the data, and data is kind of evergreen, if you like, and it can be applied to your business, what it looks like today and what it will look like in a few months once your acquisition and your integration has taken place. Because the tool is there, it sits on top of your business and gives you the insight, isn't it? So from a sort of merger's point of view, the tools that you're providing are a fantastic buy because they're not out of date, they do not need upgrading, I believe. They can be applied to your business no matter what size it is today and how it may develop in the future.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the technologies, you can look at it in terms of manufacturing. A company buys a manufacturing asset, the manufacturing asset doesn't change in that process. It's a commercial change, and the physical assets and the data tools, the analytical tools we're talking about, they still apply. The process hasn't changed. So it still gives the benefit whether whether the company is owned by this company or another company. You mentioned there about upgrading. Yes, you're right. In a change such as you're talking about, a merger and acquisition, the product doesn't need to be upgraded. But it has to be said, we are constantly improving. There's such an area of research as data is data analytics. We're issuing patents ourselves all the time as we improve how our predictive techniques. It comes to two sort of areas. You have improved performance in terms of building the models, in terms of looking at the data and getting to a result faster. Data is notoriously noisy, and one of the biggest things that you spend time doing is cleaning the data before you do the analytics.
Indeed, yes.
But
Absolutely.
The tools that come forward get us faster and quicker and better at that, so that you spend less time churning through the data and more getting the result out. Furthermore, then there's the other side of the patterns and the techniques in terms of actually just getting better prediction. That you get, we talk about false positives. The idea of a false positive is that the tool suggests you should do something, but it's actually when you look at it, we're not going to do that. It's a false recommendation. You get better and better at that, so you get true positives, where it makes a recommendation and it's absolutely what you should do. And the upgrades we're seeing, the development of the technologies is just getting better at getting to the answer, getting to the answer quicker, and the answer being a better recommendation.
That's absolutely fine. In fact, I'd just like to ask you, Lawrence, when you're speaking to your customer base, is that a clear trend that they are looking for tools which will evolve with them as they move forward with their digitalisation, they move forward with their process management, and how that's going to change, either as it is at the moment, maybe through acquisition, not necessarily. But are those conversations that you're having more of, that they want a tool that will grow with them?
They absolutely do, David. And I think in terms of one of our value propositions to our customers, it's a case of providing a solution that's future-proofed as well. So as they acquire additional manufacturing plants, as they start developing different drugs and everything else, they know that our solution will grow with them and provide a common layer, data layer, analytics layer across the piece as well. So it means in terms of consuming maybe additional manufacturing operations, it means it's very, very quick in terms of time to benefit, in terms of overlaying our solution on those new manufacturing plants.
Because that's the big one, isn't it? It's always, we needed it yesterday. It's always speed, isn't it? We just don't have the time to really look at this stuff in detail. And we do not want any kind of massive interruption because we can't afford to. It's just not possible. So something that can be literally put in place very quickly is highly attractive, isn't it, to those those guys are trying to move forward at speed, but maybe don't have the tools that they quite need. It does seem to me that they maybe miss the last sort of step, and the last step is where we are with digital assets, with assets in general, how you manage them and how you maintain their performance. It does seem that what AspenTech are doing is moving that forward, just that one step, but that one step can really deliver massive benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the one step you make initially when you learn on either a dryer or a granulator or a reactor or whatever, but these companies have many of them, and the companies they acquire, there's a commonality. So you make that one step, learning a particular pattern around a particular asset, but then you can learn it across all these different assets. Sorry, all these common assets, in fact. So if you've got a dryer of a particular design, or similar design, one of the beauties of our own technologies, it doesn't have to be the ABC 1, 2, 3 variety of the dryer. It can be just dryers in general. Indeed. You create that model and you can spread it out quickly. And you democratize the access to the technology. You implement it, the model's there, and you just take the advice. Again, each time you do it, you don't have to rebuild and be a data expert.
Indeed. Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for that. In fact, I'd like to stay with you, Richard, if we could. I'd like to touch on something specific from AspenTech, your Intel solution. Can you give us a sort of overview of really how that solution really does help manufacturers with their asset value?
Yeah, so Intel looks back over historic data, and helps identify the patterns it sees that lead to asset failure, that lead to a breakdown, be a seal or the breaking of a bearing or whatever. So it's machine learning tools that look through that pattern, help prevent the challenges that are caused by aging, that cause increased energy usage and higher maintenance. The agents we put in place advise when an equipment should be maintained, It may advise that there's an impending failure, or it may advise that if you turn this down, whatever it is, for speed or voltage or ampage, that will result in this thing failing later, or not at all. And so given sufficient orderly notice, problems can be corrected at low cost, lowest impact, avoiding disruption to the supply chain, and just dramatically improving overall production performance. You can sort of link that back down to sort of the key manufacturing metrics, KPIs such as OEE. You increase the speed of manufacture, you can increase the amount of time the asset is running for, and you improve the quality of what you're producing.
And also to you, Lawrence, when you maybe speaking to, maybe say a new client, for instance, and you're outlining what MTEL can actually do, is that really a light bulb moment for those customers that they can kind of see how the tool can benefit them kind of instantly, or is there a learning curve there?
No, it is. It's quite very interesting actually, David, because we have differing responses based upon the maturity level of the customer.
That's a good point,
their digital
yes,
journey.
indeed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Some people say, wow, I didn't believe it could do that. One of the things we do very effectively is we actually, to demonstrate the capability and the value we can deliver, we actually take the customer's existing historical data and process that to demonstrate the value we can actually deliver. And that tends to be the light bulb moment then, when they can say, wow, you actually could predict this, you predicted it. And they then look back in their maintenance record and say, actually, there was a failure then. So we're in effect simulating what has happened in the past.
That's amazing, isn't it?
To demonstrate.
Yeah.
And it is that is the
Yeah.
incredible piece.
That's the kind of thing that I guess maybe incumbents in the industry kind of don't get. They kind of say, well, how on earth can you do that? How is that possible? How can we look back in time and see something that we knew happened, but and maybe caused us substantial issues with our process? How can you do that? It's kind of almost like magic when you kind of explain that to someone, that you can do that with the raw data. Importantly, it's the analytics on top. It's how you interpret that, and that's where AI and machine learning comes into its own, because that's what it's very, very good at. Yeah, it really is.
It's one of the actual common things we do when we're trying to. When a customer's not entirely convinced of this kind of technology, they're early on their journey, we'll ask them to give us some data. Give us a piece of data where we know there's 6 occurrences of a particular event occurred. Tell us when 3 of them occurred, and we'll learn from that. And then we'll go back to, well, we sensed that one 15 days ahead, we sensed that one 20 days ahead. And we also think you had 3 other occurrences. There was here, and here. And you ask them to go and look, and they go, oh yeah, actually you're absolutely right.
But they didn't know. That was just hidden from them. Yeah. So
or they knew, but they just kept it from us.
Yeah.
To prove it.
Or they didn't know that, and that was maybe eroding their process, and they just didn't know.
It's the light bulb moments where they see, they go, oh, wow, okay, yes, it really works. And it's lovely when you actually sort of show those results.
Absolutely. And also I think for me, and also an amazing part of that is, I believe the solution also has autonomous agents. And we talk about automation a lot, in process management, but taking automation to the next level, and what that actually means, maybe machine to machine communication and that kind of thing. Again, that's an interesting way forward, isn't it? And with the tools that are available, that's becoming a very, very real reality. It's being able to do that with giving autonomous agent a task, and off it goes. That's an amazing thing to be able to do, isn't it?
It is. I think it's possibly the future for pharmaceuticals. We've closed the loop in some industries where the tools will advise that if you do this, you will improve the yield, and we can close the loop like in an APC solution. We actually go back to the control system and raise that temperature automatically and drive the process to improve. For pharmaceuticals, that really gets into scary areas of validation. Can we trust this software to actually make a change to the process? Because you could affect the quality of the product and effectively the safety to the patient. But it's the future. That's the next step. They're beginning to trust in this technology. As long as there's a human in there, just to go, yeah, that's good, we'll change it. But
that's the future in terms of that's the future.
The full autonomous. That's the future.
In terms of what we call the self-optimizing plant. It's a closed loop solution that allows, but obviously as required, we've got human intervention as required, but they're proposing changes which are then automatic.
Do you see those, I guess, the automation aspects in certain areas of plant? It's clearly going to impact first in certain areas and maybe not in others?
Sorry, just that question again.
What I'm getting at, I guess, is if you were going to put an autonomous agent in place, as you already said, that in certain areas of plant, it can be quite contentious. Is that going to do something with batch? And will there be some compliance issues down the road, which we obviously don't want to get involved with? So are you seeing that the aspect of sort of MTEL, for instance, which is, yes, we can have a level of autonomy, but is that autonomy going to be in certain aspects of plant first and others later on?
Yeah, absolutely. So things like utilities.
Yeah.
Where you can't directly link that to patient safety, particularly with pharmaceuticals. I mean, in all the manufacturing, things that are less regulated, polymers and so on, polymer specialty chemicals, you can close the loop already. That idea of the self-optimizing plant is a reality. Pharmaceuticals will lag, and they will start trying it on the things that are not directly involved with the drug substance, for starters, would be my expectation.
That's
when you
interesting.
fully close the loop.
Yeah.
So it's just that the trust gets built. And that's historical, really, even with pharmaceuticals, with all technologies. The idea of electronic batch records, which was started in the early 2000s.
Well, do you find that as well, Lawrence, that you go into a customer and say, well, it depends who they are. If they're an incumbent, then that's a different conversation to maybe even a startup or someone that's really innovating in the space and they're quite new. But clearly they're going to be using digital tools from the go-get, from day one. Those two conversations are quite different, aren't they?
Yes, they absolutely are different conversations as well. But there is quite a lot of, and it's interesting enough, there is quite a lot of knowledge within the marketplace, particularly in the pharmaceutical, about particularly the likes of asset performance management as well. So, but there are a number of bespoke solutions that are maybe just reporting solutions that aren't as comprehensive as AspenTech solutions as well. So it very much depends upon the maturity of the customer and what they've implemented historically. We are finding that a number of customers have developed legacy solutions, bespoke legacy solutions, which again, that by definition comes with its own challenges in terms of capability, upgrades and everything else as well. But yeah, it is two different conversations.
I think the space, it's ultimately, I guess again, because through the lens of COVID, it's becoming even more dynamic than maybe it has ever been in the past, hasn't it? It's kind of maybe a sector that has historically taken a long time to move forward because it takes a long time to develop a new drug for obvious reasons. But that seems to be out of the window. It seems to me that if you had to pick a sector that was going to accelerate beyond belief, it's going to be pharmaceuticals. They're going to need the tools to be able to do that because they have to innovate at ridiculous speed from now on. I don't think we're going to return to maybe the systems we had previously. This is the new normal for them, and they clearly have to have new and improved systems in place.
Yeah, what's lovely about dealing with pharmaceuticals, from my career point of view, is they are by nature innovative companies. They are constantly looking for the new drug. And you've got lots of individuals in those companies who love technology. They love the benefits it can bring, that we can get better quality, that we can run things, that there's technologies out there. They want to try them. It's just the nature, the R&D basis of those companies. And so their minds are always open to new ideas. They often are.
We're kind of on the cusp. Well, we're on the cusp, aren't we? That the whole idea of a personalised medicine, a drug just for me, whatever I've got, not something I buy off the shelf which has to appeal to everyone. It's for me. It's for my particular body chemistry, and we are kind of really on the cusp of that, aren't we? We're nearly there with that level of personalisation. We aren't going to get there without using more digital tools, clearly. But you're right. I think the pharmaceutical industry understands that. And it wants to move forward with those tools because they can see the future, isn't it? It's not on the horizon anymore. That horizon is rapidly approaching, and personalisation clearly is going to be a big one.
Yeah, to use a cliche, it's pushing us an open door.
Yeah, absolutely. The next thing I'd like to ask Richard is to look at sort of predictive analytics. Now, I guess from a manufacturer's point of view, being able to look into the future is fantastic if you can do that, but you can. You can with the right tools and, if you like, looking at the data set in the correct way. Could you kind of give us a sort of overview of how sort of predictive analytics would actually work sort of in process?
Yeah, sure. So I personally see there's sort of three areas that I'm thinking about. There's the ability to predict asset or process degradation. So we're predicting that that's going off specification, predicting the failure in advance of an impending breakdown or quality issue. You've got the ability to make decisions that not only minimise the disruption, but minimise costs, that you don't have to hold certain spares in stock, that you minimise just cost simply losing product. But you can also protect the public health by ensuring continuity, resulting in a quality drug supply that is guaranteed, that is always there. You can't risk your security of supply. and kind of already covered by the previous 2 points, but the digital technology behind this enable manufacturers to get more capacity out their existing equipment. You don't have to spend more money buying new assets.
Super. Many thanks for listening to this podcast from Process Industry Informer. It's goodbye from me, Dave Hull, and it's goodbye from Lawrence.
Goodbye, and thank you very much.
And it's goodbye from Richard.
Many thanks, Dave. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening, and tune in soon for another PII podcast. Or visit PIImag.com to subscribe to our bi-monthly magazine